Hello. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Heart Warriors. This is a series I've been inspired and guided to do thanks to my energetic connection with Kata Judah. Kata Judah is the sacred masculine site in Central Australia, very close to Uluru, which is the sacred feminine site. What I'm here to do is to give a platform to our men, so men can speak of their journey, their experiences, the masculine journey into the heart, their highs, their lows, their deepest, darkest moments. How did they overcome that? What can they now share with others walking this path? And of course, us women who want to get a better insight into the masculine journey. I was asked this week why I only interview men. And this is how the show started. You know, I woke up one day and just knew I would be interviewing men. And as I see it, men need to hear this from other men. And basically, you know, it boils down to that. So the men who have experienced and overcome the hardships and the challenges before them are now here to share their wisdom and insights with other men who may be seeking some guidance and some inspiration. Today's guest is a man called Tim Wilde, and he's over there in the UK. He is an author, a speaker. He is into Atlantis, ascension, the most amazing crystals, spirituality, lots of exciting things. So really excited to talk to Tim and find out about his journey into the heart. Enjoy. Hello, Tim Wilde. Welcome to Heart Warriors.
Good morning, Gemma. Thank you for inviting me on.
Oh, my pleasure. I've actually known you on Facebook for quite a few years now. I've got some of your crystals here in Australia. I've actually taken one out to Kata Judah, one that, that's a long story, but there is some of your crystals at Kata Judah. So,
wow, I'm honoured to hear they've travelled so far and they're working so hard.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
that's their primary objective to do good jobs on this planet.
Yeah, well, I'd love to get into crystals a bit later, but first of all, let's hear about you. So, how would you describe the man you are today?
That's a really good question, actually, because I am trying to be as practical and authentic as I possibly can be in this very diverse and sometimes confusing spiritual field. I feel where we are at the moment is there is so much information available, but there is also so many I's that we're dotting and so many T's that we're crossing to move away from where we've been energetically, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So for those on the spiritual pathway at the moment, it is the most enlightening period that we can be involved in, but it's also the toughest and the most confusing. And we're right in the middle of it, right in the kind of crunch point.
The juicy bit.
The juicy bit. It's juicy, but it's also where we are learning the most. We're learning the most about ourselves. We're kind of it sounds almost a little bit of a cliche, the journey of rediscovery, awakening to who we truly are, but that is what we're doing. But we're having to do it without any of the previous, ways of hiding. There's no hiding anymore, is there? The light is so bright, it's so intense, the shadows are revealed, and we are having to be who we are. That is ultimately one of the largest tests that many of us will be presented with on the spiritual pathway.
Yeah, I love that. Authenticity is a theme that's come up many times, so it is a really important one. While we're at it, how would you describe authenticity and what's its importance to a man?
if you are going to present a version of yourself, be that version of yourself. Okay, regardless of what that particular aspect it is that you are bringing forward. I believe in putting as much as you possibly can into even the smallest of tasks. It doesn't matter whether you're mowing the grass or tending a flower bed, or whether you are creating a crystal grid, or ultimately providing energy situations that will transform planets, which require a large amount of responsibility. If you put 100% of your attention and your intention into that, you can only get a good result, or the result that is right for you. So it's about focus, dedication, discipline, and I think that's a big part of what's been playing out for me, particularly in the last decade or so.
Yeah, well, Tim, can we take a jump back and see how you became the man you are today? So take us back to a place in your childhood that was particularly challenging. What was happening there?
I think when we incarnate on this planet, we've got one or two choices, really, haven't we? We've got to kind of either survive and be who we know that we are, or we kind of get drawn into the matrix and become the option that is available there, which is very kind of formatted and we're told who we are, what to believe in, what to learn, what to say, and all of these different things. And this is where the tests really start, what to believe in. And my childhood was more survival, I think, than anything else. Like, kind of, I was born in 1972, so early 70s. I had the blessing of coming through to two parents who were, I suppose, spiritually awake. They were very much into the teachings of Maharishi's transcendental meditation, so they weren't closed down. And so when I was seeing things or feeling things or hearing things that were I needed confirmation about, they didn't shut me down. So that was my blessing. I maybe didn't have the correct guidance, but I was not told that I was mad and to not talk about these things, that many children actually go through this gateway and it shuts them down for a long period of time. It's like, right, okay, well, that's nonsense. Your invisible friend doesn't exist. You aren't hearing these voices. Those feelings are simply childish imagination. I didn't have any of that, so I was allowed to flow with it. And so but a lot of it I had to navigate and learn myself, and take the advice from the feelings and the intuition that was coming into me. So by about 11 or 12 years old, I'd had enough of that, and I shut myself down for my teenage years, which is what happens pretty much across the board. Once you move into the hormone phase, you have to focus on being that. You have to focus on that transformation, and any kind of spiritual predisposition, particularly in children, goes out the window. And I've noticed that complaint with a lot of spiritual parents over the years, like, oh, my child was doing so well, and all of a sudden they become a teenager and bang, it goes out the window, kind of thing. And so I threw myself into bike racing, like hard sport, when I was in my teens, and that served me. And it all changed just before my 18th birthday. I had I had an accident, and I rode into a tractor at 35 miles an hour with no helmet on, and I died for 20 minutes. I was kind of in the road, and with a crowd of people around me, including the poor tractor driver, because I'd flown down this hill, went round a corner and hit the tractor. Obviously, the tractor won. And I didn't. And so I left my body for 20 minutes, and I had that authentic light at the end of the tunnel experience, where I was riding my bicycle down this beautiful sunlit road with the wind behind me, saying, yeah, I'm not coming back. Whoa, brilliant. And all of a sudden I was dragged away from this and put back in my body with a nasty headache. And it took me a while to get over this. You know, so like I'd had no pulse, and everyone thought I was dead. And after that, during the recovery period, was when things began to change. And I went into what we would call the spiritual seeking phase, where we're looking for information, we're looking for validation for the things that we maybe have experienced previously or known, but you want to know why, and you want to know, or you want to find other people that have experienced it and also written about it. So I started going through my parents' books. You know, they had the Carlos Castaneda books, the Spanish guy who'd met up with the Yaqui Indian and discovered dimensions and energy via peyote. Read all of those, and eventually, having kind of hoovered up enough of that information, I discovered Joshua David Stone and Diana Cooper, and that was when it all changed.
Fascinating. So it sounds like, you know, I mean, up until your accident, your childhood was quite smooth, nothing particularly challenging, just navigating, you know, your gifts and
I had a lot of health problems before I hit double figures. I was very asthmatic, and that was probably, in hindsight, my response to being born into the, and a lot of people are the same way. They have almost like an allergic reaction to the density of this planet. It's like, I can't cope with this. So I had breathing difficulties and erupted with eczema, and it's just like, I'm not meant to be here, sort of thing. And I had that theme running through a lot. So yeah, it was I have a lot of really good memories, but I also remember it being very tough, very challenging. I didn't navigate the school system effectively in any way, shape, or form.
Did you know from a young age then that you were like, there was something off planet? Like, how do you remember perceiving that or knowing that as a young boy? What else was out there that you were aware of at such a young age?
I used to have a group of souls which I used to be very aware of around me, who were protecting me, and they weren't necessarily, they didn't look like your archetypal angels. They looked like you don't mess with them, and they were very, very powerful kind of figures and somewhat scary to pick up and perceive as a child, but they clearly weren't there to mean me any harm. They were just there to make sure that I got through this particular phase. And it got my perception of them and my awareness of them got so intense at one stage. I used to have to throw them out of the bathroom in the morning if I was going to the toilet or having a bath at night. I used to clear around the edges of the bathroom, like, right, out, my time, get out. I need some space. So it was very much like that. I was aware of constantly being monitored, looked after, and again, you could have this written off as childish imagination, but you get that verification when the skin stands up on your arms or the hair stands up on your arms, and that was constant, absolutely constant. And always very aware of the spirit world, of like, went through my haunted house and ghosty phase and all of this kind of thing, and always very interested in magic. And I used to collect crystals as a kid, unknowingly. Just had a collection that I would snaffle, especially if I was walking on the beach and I found a nice rock or something like that. It's like, right, that's going in my pocket. I'd waddle off with it and make grids with them, and didn't even know that they were grids at the time. It's all
so
guided.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's go on past your accident into another. What would you say was your deepest, darkest moment as an adult?
I would say the most transformational moment, what came in September 2008. My marriage of 14 years broke down overnight. And it was funny. It was just so classically initiation the way that it was set up. I was going to the south of France with a group of cyclists who I was training with. And the day before we left, I met the guy that I traveled with. His son gave me a picture and also offered me a yellow flower. And I kept them. I was like, thank you. It's just noted at the time that it's an odd thing for a 5-year-old child to do. Now I know by experience, if a child gives me flowers, that I'm in for a whooping. Because that's also what used to happen in the days of old. When the knights went off to war, they were offered flowers by the children before they went. So this was very, very I was given this flower, went off and had 2 days in the Alps in the south of France, got literally turned inside out by a load of guys who were much, much fitter than me. And when I got back, I just my marriage disintegrated. The kind of the whys are irrelevant, but I wound up living back at my mother's with all my clothes in bin liners. So it's remember it very, very clearly, and it happened so fast. It was a demolition. So it's a demolition of what I had previously, and moved into this new phase. And it was at that point that I've been friends with Diana Cooper since 2003. So we've been friends for 5 years, but I've been doing her garden, not really focusing on anything remotely to do with my spiritual pathway. And at that point, she started receiving information from Archangel Metatron about me, about what I was going to be doing. And at the particular time, all of this information was just sailing over the top of my head. It was highly irrelevant compared with what I was actually going through. And then it started to sink in a little bit that I'd been through this change to catapult me from one situation into another. So as well as being my darkest period, it was also my most enlightening period, because I found out who I was, what I'm supposed to be doing here, what my mission on this planet was. And off I went. That was it.
Yep, I love that. And I wonder how many men can relate to that story of a similar experience where life was just crumbled and destroyed so the man could step up into his mission.
Yeah.
What,
I think it's
go on.
thank you. I think it's more of a familiar theme now running through people's lives than my individual experiences. I'm witnessed, particularly in the last 8 years or so, a phenomenal amount of these demolitions going on to bring people from their previous comfort zones into the format of their spiritual pathway. And it's never comfortable, is it? It's you have to transform, you have to move through it, and you whine and you complain and you struggle and you swear at your guides and have paddies and tantrums, but ultimately you step up because you have to, and that's the way it goes. So it's becoming quite a reoccurring theme now. I don't know if you've noticed as well.
Definitely. Can we go into your specific details of how you did step up? If you could remember when you came back or you were at your mother's and, it was like, wow, okay, taking stock of what has actually taken place, seeing it seemed to be quite sudden and maybe you weren't expecting it. How does a man in that situation then step up into discovering what his mission is? What were the whys around the demolition? Can you put some perspective on it all and relate it to your own story?
I had to be put in a position where I would change where I was going. And ultimately, I believe when we go through a demolition like that, it's not just maybe to change the circumstances of our setup, it's to energetically rewire us. So we're then offered a choice. Are you going to accept your mission or are you not? And I was told very clearly, this is your mission. Do you accept it? And I went, yeah, bring it on. Can't get any worse than it is at the moment, kind of thing, or it can't get any more challenging. And so I just said yes. I said wholeheartedly, I am going to be here for the ascension of this planet and to assist all of these people that you are telling me that I am going to be assisting. So that was it. It was offered as a almost as a meeting. I had a meeting with Archangel Michael in my bedroom one morning, and he appeared to me in a big blue column of light. I'm not an especially visual person. I'm not one of these people that, oh, there's an angel flying around me sort of thing. I can see it. It's all very much done on intuition and clairsentience and the claircognizance that we get, that knowing that you have. But on this occasion, I could really clearly see with my eyes closed this blue light just come down in a column in the bedroom, and Archangel Michael telling me that I had had a lifetime, as many lifetimes as a high priest in Atlantean times, and that my responsibility was going to lie with the big, and I remember these words very clearly, the big changes that are going to be coming on planet Earth. Of course, I thought all of this was going to happen in 2012. I didn't realize that from 2012 onwards, we were then going to be going through this incredibly, almost like this wringing out process of all of the old stuff that we had. I thought it was all going to happen very, very quickly. So I said, yes, I said, I'm going to do this. And I started communicating a lot more with Diana Cooper about, you know, what she was receiving about me. I needed the help. I needed the information. Back then I wasn't really sure about what I was receiving. So it's good to have that confirmation, that bounce back. And so I had about 4 years of navigating this role of responsibility. And in 2013, I was given the green light. And they said, right, it starts now. Okay, you get yourself out there and the rest will follow suit. And it was in August 2013, I was on holiday in the south of France with my family, that Diana Cooper published in her newsletter the first meditation that I ever wrote, which was the Blue Star Seal of Atlantis. And of course, from that point, it just built up, and more work came in, and more information, and more responsibility. So the stepping up, I stepped up enthusiastically. It was what I wanted to do. It was a drive more than anything else. It wasn't something that I could turn around and say no to.
I can get that. So what about men who are not visited by angels? How can they find their mission?
This is an interesting one, because I have regular conversations with people at the moment, and a lot of them are divine feminine souls who are clearly frustrated that their man isn't stepping up, or the men around them aren't stepping up, because there seems to be a big gap or a big division in that kind of focus. Say I've got a workshop and I've got 120 people attending my live workshop. I'd say probably it's a lot better than it used to be, but only 10% of them will be fellas now. And before, there'd be 1 or 2 there that had been dragged along by the missus kind of thing, and they'd be sat there sulking at the beginning of the workshop. By the end of the day, they're having a whale of a time, but the numbers are not matching. It seems to be that the women want to be involved in this aspect of spirituality. But what I've identified is that the men on this planet are beginning to rise into their power. They're beginning to step into their heart space, but they are not identifying with spirituality in the same way that we would maybe expect them to, or that we would maybe want them to. Like, they're not going to want to attend unicorn workshops. They're not going to be particularly interested in crystals. Well, they might be, but they're not going to tell their mates, kind of thing. It's a little bit like that at the moment. We're halfway through, and the men are finding where their position in this shift actually is. So I believe the next 10 years is going to see the previous 10 years that we've just been through has been the establishment of the vibration of the divine feminine, that massive balancing, because it was an imbalance. The last 10,000 years on this planet have been a predominantly non-divine masculine show, and the whole thing's been run by ego. That's what planet Earth and the third dimensional matrix have been formatted to function as. And it's not been a comfortable place to live, especially if you're a woman. So this period, this last 10 years, has been a downpouring of divine feminine energies to bring the divine feminine back into power, back into a space where the healing occurs, the forgiveness occurs, the love returns, and ultimately power and sovereignty too. And I believe that needed to happen first as a birthing process. And now I think, or I feel, it is both all of our responsibilities to create that platform, that safe space for men to move into, where they can fulfill their roles, their destinies on this planet without any, any kind of precursors as to what they're supposed to be doing. They just naturally fill the role. So nobody's saying to them, you ought to be doing this, you ought to be doing that. They simply follow their hearts and their missions. And that ultimately, I think, is where most of us are flowing at the moment. We're following our hearts. Now, if we're not following our hearts, we're not going generally in the right direction, because it's either the ego or the heart that's in play. We've got to navigate how we work with our egos. The ego is never going to go away. It's always going to be there. But it's more mastery of ego. Okay, so once a soul, whether divine feminine or divine masculine, has put the heart in charge, from that point onwards, everything flows in a fifth dimensional direction. It becomes heart-based. And ultimately, what we're looking for is a planetary field of fifth dimensional energy where everybody is following their hearts. That is the safe space that is needed to be required for people to grow at the moment. Because there's so many, you should do this, or you should do that, or why aren't you doing this? Or and ultimately that's not a safe space for anybody. It's
yeah,
predetermined field. Does that make sense?
I totally resonate here. And a couple of things I'd just like to add. When you said about the 10 years for the divine feminine to come in, I've often spoken of that. I sort of narrow it down to my own journey of 5 years, but knowing that now I'm in a position that I can hold that space for our men coming in now, and I'm not attacking them because I'm healed, I've forgiven. I mean, I've got a story as well, but it's healed. And and so the men can drop their defenses and their weapons and come into their heart space. I love what you said about the men not necessarily being into crystals and unicorns and spirituality like many of us women are. And that's wonderful, and part of this series is interviewing at least 100 men, and we can see they're all so different. And, they're not all necessarily into the further aspects of spirituality. They're unique. And, that's, I think, a beautiful example of how, each man is on his own path and, always through the heart. What I'd like to get into, Tim, is while we're here, is how does a man get into his heart? Can you expand on this? I loved what you said about when we're all in our heart energy, that then is the birthing of the fifth dimension, because we're all communicating, it's like, through the heart. Can you expand on that, specifically to the masculine journey?
I think the first and most foremost and the most important thing is to be a good person. Okay, to be a good, and this automatically goes back to heart. Follow your heart. You know what's wrong and right at the end of the day. And we're still, even though we're moving through this very intense kind of build-up phase, the laws of karma now apply even more so than they did previously, because we haven't got that kind of bad store card that we can build up in one lifetime and then pay off in the next. Everything happens in the now moment. So I think in order to fulfill that role of spirituality, or to be who, we want the men to be, is to just completely drop any expectations and just let people be good people. And there's plenty of opportunities to be good people on this planet, because the planet is absolutely screeching for this good energy, we are removing ourselves from the third dimensional matrix and resetting again at a higher frequency. All that is required of us is that we are loyal to the requests of our higher self and our heart. So we follow that, regardless of what anybody else is telling us to do. It is our own heart's guidance and the guidance of our what we like in the trade to call our higher self, the higher version of ourselves that is constantly there, very, very close to us now, to bring us through the next phase of the mission. So, you know, even looking at it from that perspective, the spiritual men of today aren't going to be so much aware of the fact that they're communicating from their higher self. They're not going to be aware of the fact that they are functioning from the heart rather than the ego. This is a natural process of energy evolution that's I'm witnessing going on around us all the time now. People are moving into their hearts as a matter of natural process and progress, rather than having to fight with the choices they're made, or fight with their thoughts. And so it's simply about being you, being authentic, being a good person, and doing what you know is right or correct for your particular aspect of the mission. And it doesn't even have to be regarded as a mission. You just live your life as a good person. You provide what you have as whatever you've been gifted with for this pathway, and bring it through. Just be who you are. I think that's, and don't be frightened of being who you are. You know, a lot of people are worried about being a good person in case the people around them kind of judge them for their goodness, and that's falling away. We've got a lot more. It's a lot easier now in the energy climate that we live in and the frequencies that exist around this planet to be good. It's a lot harder, and it's getting increasingly harder to be a bad, or what we would class as a bad person. And a lot of that can be classed in a field of judgment. But ultimately, the heart, the universe, the laws of karma know what's wrong and right. So if we are following our hearts and moving forwards and doing what we know is the correct thing for us to be doing and for the people around us, because we have a lot of responsibility in the roles that we have, you know, and in many cases, it's simply leading by example. When you're functioning from this space of heart, whether you know that you're doing it or not, you are setting that heart-centered example for the people around you, and their vibration will rise to you. And that's how this ascension process is working. It's an energetic tidal wave that's spread around our planet, and it's easier to be good than it is to be what we would class as evil or bad. You know, to maintain this energy of 3D matrix, the control, all of the kind of the lower and the higher, the tier system, the people that have very little and the people have too much. It must be getting really uncomfortable to sustain that, especially when everybody knows what they're up to now. You know, it's I look at it and think, how are you still doing it? You haven't got long, have you?
Tim, I'm interested where the mind comes into all this, because I mean, you know, this is Heart Warriors, and we're all, well, you know, we're becoming more aware of the frequency of the heart is the fifth dimensional frequencies, and of love, and you know, where we're wanting humanity to go, where we're here to take humanity. So what role does a healthy masculine mind play in integration with the heart?
That's a really good question. A healthy mind is as within, so without. A healthy mind is attached to a healthy body, a healthy lifestyle, a healthy outlook. And obviously what you put into yourself is then reflected outwards. So I mean, many of us have kind of risen unconsciously to the calling to become more purified in the way that we treat ourselves, what we put in our bodies. And that's natural as you vibrate at a higher frequency, as the light enters the mental and the emotional bodies and shakes out all of all of the old programming, we automatically gravitate to a healthier way of life, a healthier way of thinking, unplugging from the garbage from the news and social media, and especially becoming kind of more refined and more at one with the kind of the sexuality side of it. All of these things that were in a state of non-acceptance previously. And again, we know what's right and wrong because it either vibrates at the frequency of truth and light or it doesn't. So we're just flowing automatically with that. Again, it's taking the mind out of the equation, but using and being friends with the mind, because the mind is part of us. So it's befriending the ego, befriending the mind. When you've got an enemy, whether it's internal or external, that's indicating that something needs to be cleared, healed, purified in any way, shape, or form. So it comes up naturally. It's either a reoccurring lesson, or eventually, if it's ignored, it becomes physical. So within the, I mean, we've got these wonderful human bodies that are barometers for everything that we're experiencing energetically and as part of our process. So it's becoming the healthy mind, healthy body, and that's not a cliche. It begins with us. Our responsibility for the planet and the people around us begins with us on a physical, mental, emotional, spiritual level, I think.
Thank you. Yes. I'd just like to jump back what you were saying about karma. Could you please give an explanation into why some people are suffering and in pain, emotional pain? You know, what is the explanation behind that people could maybe give some meaning to it?
There's huge different spectrums and reasons and causes and everything for the field of suffering that is occurring on the planet at the moment. And in many cases, we are asked to assist with this, but from a point of higher observation, to create the answers or create the solutions through offering a different space to navigate that with. So the field of suffering is being created by being plugged into I keep using the term the matrix, which it is. That was our learning space for over 10,000 years. We experienced being in 3D at the fall of Atlantis, at a very, the bottom of the barrel of the third dimension, to experience what it was like to be disconnected from source, disconnected from ourselves, to just be a physical human with no kind of rhyme or reason on a planet struggling to survive. And a lot of that is where the suffering has come from, being plugged into these scenarios where we are not serving ourselves or not in tune with our hearts, and completely handing our power over to those that basically do not mean us well in any way, shape, or form. So in order to remove ourselves from those situations, in many cases, the suffering is an end result of resistance to change. That's what I'm seeing in many cases at the moment. The resistance to change, the resistance to movement, the resistance of flowing from what we class as lower to higher creates the suffering, because the resistance is becoming more difficult to actually stay in a lower state of mind, lower consciousness, is now painfully hard. And if we're not dealing with what we've got going on internally within us, if we're not dealing with the situations that are presented to us, if we're not taking these initiations on board and working through them, that ultimately leads to suffering. And the world has been put in a position where it is in crisis. 3D is in crisis. It's going through the demolition that we personally have been through on our own. So when people begin to see things for what they are and they take responsibility for themselves, that's when they ultimately begin to step into that higher role in the frequency. And a lot of the time, that only happens because you're suffering. A lot of the time, people will just go through their lives just cruising, until something stops them and they have to make the change. So the suffering is the transitional period. It's switching over. That's not in all cases, but in the kind of the bulk case at the moment of what's occurring on this world.
So where does the karma come into it? And let's talk about in this day and age where you say it's pretty much instantaneous. So,
yeah,
if someone has a terrible day, is it because of something they did yesterday? How does it play
not
out?
necessarily. I think having a terrible day is a human. It's a human thing. Okay, like we've got to accept that we're human on a planet where some days are just shit and some days are grand. It's an energy roller coaster. There's a balance that we have to find, I think, and this is a logical kind of balance where you can't put everything you can't put every single fault or thing that occurs as having some kind of spiritual meaning. Sometimes you're just going to have a crap day, and that can be the way that you're thinking, it can be the way that your energy is, it could be your biorhythms, it could be your astrology, blah blah blah, all the rest of it. But some days are good, some days are not. And I always like to think that the higher realms aren't quite gifted with a holiday experience. You don't go up through the higher dimensional spaces by being on a permanent holiday. You got to work for it. You got to go through the shifts and the gateways and the initiations that are then presented at a higher level. I think our consciousness continues even in non-physical, very much in the way that we're experiencing, but with far more access to the energies that are available. So karma at the moment is a funny thing on this planet, because we have the karma that works for us as we're flowing through the cause and effect, the law of return. So you put the energy out and you get the energy back again, and that is part of the universal flow. But paradoxically, you've got the 3D matrix, which has been self-sustaining for a long time, and they've evaded the laws of karma by basically, in many ways, not going through the passing over process and keeping it almost their exclusive thing. But the point is now approaching where all hearts will be weighed. Okay, and it's going to be an interesting gateway for many of them to walk through. And if you want to know why they are so terrified of basically giving up what they've created and sustained and want to maintain the control, is because if they don't, then ultimately they fall into the karmic field and have to pay back for what's been done. So there's different karmic fields at play at the moment. But for you and me and for other people that are operating in this high frequency field, you put out and it comes back again. But a lot of this karmic, and people say, well, why am I struggling so much? Why is this going? Why am I having such a crappy time? A lot of the manifestation and the creation that we're working with at the moment is being fueled by the unseen wiring that we've got going on in the back, in the backs of our minds, in the body. So, and all of these project outwards as part of the daily creation. And this is why we're going through so much shadow work, to reveal these parts that have been chugging away in the background for decades, controlling our lives, controlling our experience. So we're being shown them all now. And this is another reason why I'd say the suffering chart has gone up somewhat, is because we're being made to witness or see the things about ourselves that we're not comfortable with. And that's a big one.
Tim, seeing the focus of Heart Warriors is on our men and masculinity, what direction would you like to take this conversation in now?
If you're a man, be a man, but be a good man. Okay? I think that this is, I think we have to kind of like bring this subject back to, like to what we actually are on this planet. And so many people have been afraid of being who they are. I mean, for years, I've been I suppose I did kind of wrestle with my masculinity a little bit when I first started this, but I've rapidly learned over my life that I will always be myself. I cannot change myself to suit anybody else's picture in any way, shape, or form. Because the second I do, I get whacked hard until I move back into my own personal alignment again. So, yeah, I'm extremely spiritual. Every single minute of my waking day on this planet is focused on the spiritual pathway, my family, the things around me, balancing, juggling. And a lot of the time, yeah, I'll happily admit that I'm way too busy. I've got to manage my own time and my own energy, and I've still got a load of things that I've got to work through. But I accept the aspects of my personality that come with being a man. And once you have gone into that state of acceptance, that boils down to self-love. So if you're a man listening to this, one of the first things about this pathway is learning to love and accept yourself. Because as within, so without. If you don't love and accept yourself for what you are, then how can you possibly extend that field of acceptance to the rest of the planet? Does that make sense?
Oh, definitely. I love it. Okay, so let's expand on that. How does a man come to, love and accept himself? If he's relatively new to shadow work, where does he start?
There's a million places that you can start, but you have to find what works for you. I mean, the most confusing part at the moment about the spiritual pathway is the quantity of options that you will be offered. Some of them are good, and some of them are not so good. Some of them are authentic, and others are being presented by a picture that might look authentic, but in actual isn't. And it's about authenticity. It's about following what's right for you. So in many cases, people that are starting out, it's necessary for them to find and to try out what doesn't work for them, because then you find out what does. And so there's no sugary pill for the spiritual pathway. That's the first, and you have to work. Okay. Everything about the spiritual pathway requires, I mean, for me, it's been discipline, it's been routine, it's been work, it's been about the constant refining of what I do. And I've taken that way too far previously. I've taken it to the point where I've just rinsed myself to a point where I'm just a mess, and I can't give anymore. And so I do think, although women and men both share that drive, for me particularly, it's if you are feeling that drive, if you're feeling that push, because the beginning of the spiritual pathway is like a tidal wave, it's like a tsunami that comes through your life, and it rearranges what is not going to be in alignment with that spiritual pathway and leaves you with the kind of the basic structure of what is. So work from that point, follow what you are guided to. And sometimes you might be guided to the wrong thing for your own benefit. Brush it off and move on.
Yeah, like a relationship, then you know that what you don't want, you can find out what you do want.
Exactly. There's one thing that I've noticed over the years is that a lot of people will plump for the spiritual pathway because because it feels good. Okay, receiving energy feels good, connecting with the angels feels good, if that's what you're into. Working in that field feels good, but then you have to work, because ultimately that energy that comes in that you connect with will require you to lose what you do not need. Okay, so the shedding of the skins it begins, and it all leads back to the heart, to self-love. Until you love yourself, until you have honored and accepted yourself, who you are, what your role is on this planet, you'll be working until you do. That's ultimately the way it is, I believe.
Yeah. No, thank you. Yeah. And as regards to shadow work, it's always, I think, worth remembering that a spiritual teacher will teach you to lead yourself, empower yourself, not always be dependent on them. If you can outgrow your teacher, that's wonderful, because there's always people that will res. So that's, I think, important, if you agree, to keep that in mind. I'd like to touch on some things I know that you're really interested in. Can we start with crystals? So
crystals.
People who are new to crystal, I've got this crystal. It's not as big as yours, but it's one I like to keep here when I'm doing these shows. And I've just got a little piece of that I was gifted of Catajuda that I have with me.
Oh, wow.
It is National Park. You're not allowed to take anything, but this was gifted to me. I'm just putting it out there. I didn't take it. Crystals. What are crystals apart from a rock?
Crystals are an extension of ourselves. Okay. So, and these are the wisdom-soaked words of Serapis Bey and Saint Germain, who I've spoken to about crystals before. Without crystals on our spiritual pathway, we'd still be another decade in the dark, because what they've assisted us to do is reach into the higher realms, almost like having a copper rod. If you want to get struck by lightning, you go out and stand in the garden with a copper rod in your hand. Not that we do, but it's a similar effect. So I have a crystal here in my hand. This crystal is connected to multiple spaces within the higher realms that I would not have been able to reach previously. Obviously, this might not be the case 50 years or 100 years in the future, because we will have moved through the physical limitations that we are currently experiencing. But they have been the bridge between the realms. Crystals are the bridge between the realms, and have enabled the higher realms, the non-physical, to connect with us and anchor their energy in. And they also have all of this lovely information that's been encoded into them, particularly during Lemurian times and Atlantean times, that by connecting with them, we then receive our version of the coding, which then comes out in the work that we are doing on this planet. So just a little crystal story. When I first realized just how essential to my pathway, my particular pathway, they actually are. When I first started getting into the kind of the crystal skulls and the crystals and all of the other beautiful shiny goodies that exist on in the ascension field, I bought 10 amethyst skulls, and I put them on a kind of like an old grid. I made a grid in my kitchen with them, and I was having a really, really busy day. It was one of those days where I kind of woke up in the morning and it's 9 o'clock at night and I'm still running around. There's still things to do. And I'd begun to get myself out on Facebook. I had a small following of people that were following what I was doing. And this lady from the United States messaged me, and she said, "I'm so sorry. I don't mean to pry and I forget, you might think I'm completely potty, but I'm very connected to the Pleiadian High Council. And the Pleiadian High Council have been trying to connect with you all day. And they just say, can you pick up your bloody phone, please?" And I was just like, and then the penny dropped, and it just dropped straight away. So I'd set up this grid in my kitchen of these 10 crystal skulls, these amethyst skulls, and the Pleiadian High Council had linked into them. This is what crystals do. This is what they do. They provide energy anchors, portals, and gateways for these souls to connect into, especially if you've opened them up and said, right, do your thing. And so the Pleiadian High Council had been basically trying to get hold of me all day, and I'd been doing this, doing that, running around. And so she messaged me and I said, thank you so much. And from that particular communication, I received a load of information from the Pleiadian High Council, which Diana Cooper and I put into our first book together. And also I created 2 workshops based on this incredible healing tool called the Blue Rose, or the Heart Healing Rose, which kind of they downloaded into me straight away. I was like, yay, brilliant. But this all came from crystals. So that was one of many kind of primary indications of how important, particularly for this phase of the journey, that my connection to crystals is. And other people will be drawn to them for similar reasons. You won't know why you want a crystal. You won't know why you like it. he's like, oh, it's shiny, I need it, sort of thing. And so therefore you have this connection, but they are working through multi-dimensional spaces simultaneously, oscillating through, we can see one space at a time. A crystal will exist all the way back up through all of these dimensional spaces simultaneously. So they are so, I believe, essential for this part of our journey. Maybe in the future they won't be. We'll be making those connections ourselves, but right now that's where we are.
So for someone who, is relatively new to crystals and they go out and they buy a few crystals, do they need to learn how to make a grid, or can they, I mean, for example, I've got, even in this room, probably 20, 40, 50 crystals just scattered around,
Yeah.
sleep with some under my pillow, whatever.
So,
is that enough, or do you have to learn how to make grids?
my advice to anybody asking how to use a crystal is, well, what did you do when you first picked that crystal up? Because there are many, many crystal handbooks out there that tell you got to do this and you got to do that. But ultimately, your way of working with a crystal will be completely personal to you. And if you've gone for a crystal and you were attracted to it, the chances are you already know how to use it. Okay, you already know how to connect that crystal. That crystal has already communicated with you and said what it wants. Okay, most of the time we don't pick crystals, crystals pick us, particularly Lemurians. Lemurians are very fussy about their keepers. So we're drawn to crystals, and we go, I want that crystal, I need it. And it's more like, well, that crystal's chosen you, and you two are now bonding. And that energy is working at a very high frequency. So it goes so much deeper than this kind of this attraction to shiny stuff that we appear to have.
Yeah. Oh, lovely. Nice. So just working with intuition, really.
Working with intuition, I could sit here all day and tell you how to work with crystals, with grids, but ultimately that's my way of doing it. Okay, so whatever way has worked best for you, then that is the way it is. I don't feel or believe that anybody has the answer. Yes. It's about how we work with that crystal. That's the best way to. If you watch a child doesn't think about how they work with a crystal, how they play with the crystal, or what they're creating. They just do it. And that's very much the energy that I feel flows best through crystal interaction and maintenance and all the rest of it.
I love that, because you're giving the power back to the people who have got the crystals. Love it.
Absolutely.
So I know you're also into angels. So what's a man's perspective on connecting with angels?
Angels, again, are a very specific part of our ascension pathway. They are here, all around us, as are dragons, unicorns, ascended masters, galactics. But you might not necessarily be aware of them or be interacting with them like, say, I am, or like, say, you are. It doesn't. People get very hung up on how they connect or the information they receive. I think it's very important to acknowledge that it's entirely how you receive and perceive energy that depends on your connection, and also what the format of your pathway is. Your pathway might not be angels. It might be to work alongside them, but as silent partners. As you go through your life, you do this. Eventually, as our consciousness rises and we become more open and aware of this field around us, then we will become more aware of them. But at the moment, we have to establish these special connections. Depending on what your mission is and what you're here to do, will be depending on whether you do receive this information from them or not, whether you're aware of the fact that you're receiving. So if you're not, don't get hung up on it, because there's a lot of people that get very, very hung up on their lack of angelic communication or their lack of their memories of Atlantis. It doesn't matter. Just follow what you are guided to do, and the rest will fall into place. I think that's the role of the angelics. Regardless of that, you will have a guardian angel, and they will constantly be nagging you to do what you're supposed to be doing, whether you are aware of that communication or not. It's there.
And how does the masculine receive that communication? Because intuition is a feminine trait, and while we all know, men do have feminine energy as well, is that received through intuition, or is there another way that men are likely to receive that guidance?
I think more claircognizance, the knowing of the guidance. I think that's that. It's again, you can get very, very highly clairsentient psychic men who can hear these voices as clear as day, or clairaudience, or seeing the range of our psychic abilities is all based on how the third eye is wired. So you could have a nice balanced mixture of all of it, and you receive a little bit of everything, or you might be just focused very much on one thing, which could be your clairsentience, your sensitivity, and your knowledge and your perception of all of the energies around it. Or you could be the knowing kind of dude where you just know it's the right thing to do. Or I mean, I was painfully clairsentient in my younger years, to the point where I could walk in a room full of 30 people and I'd pretty much know everything about them before I'd even spoken to them and met them. That's changed over the years as I've kind of developed my own personal way of doing things. So I'm more knowing now. I think that sense of knowing is a very, very powerful ally at this point in time, knowing what the right thing to do, knowing what the right information is, knowing what the guidance for yourself is. And that comes ultimately from within us. I mean, we can listen to the advice of others, including the higher realms, all day, every day, if we want to. But at one point, they're going to stand back and they're going to go very quiet, and they're going to let you make the decisions. So you might as well do that early rather than later, if you see what I mean.
And of course, I mean, is it a certain point where, to be empowered, we have to make those decisions? I mean, are relying on angels, relying on an external source, or do you see angels as an aspect of ourselves?
Both. I see angels as almost as I mean, what we perceive of the angels quite often will be a perception of the angelic aspects of ourselves, but they are also a separate evolution of souls that have existed since the beginning of time. And I see them as colleagues, as friends. And if I need the guidance, then they are there. But if I don't, then they're just nice to have around. They're all good fun. And many of them have great senses of humor as well. Like I've had some real laughs over the years with the angelics, with the ascended masters. A lot of the guides and the ascended masters on my team have got like a very military sense of humor. So if you get drubbed, they find it funny. Basically, it's a little bit like that.
Right.
And so it all depends on what your team are like and what the connections are like. But if you're not receiving that, don't worry about it. They are colleagues for this leg of the journey. When we were in 3D and we were discovering who we are, and our perceptions were very limited, then we needed kindergarten style guidance. We needed that spoon feeding. That, oh, look, he's toddling off in the wrong direction. Quick, grab the reins and drag him back again. That period of time's over now. You might get it for a little bit, but then you'll be let out the gates and you'll have to do your own thing as quickly as possible. Things have changed.
Right. Oh, great. Now, you also mentioned meditation. How important is meditation to your daily life, and how did you get into meditation?
I find meditating impossible, I'm afraid. I have a mind like a 5-year-old, which is constant. I'm so easy to distract. So I find personally, for me, sitting down quietly and meditating, especially if I've been bringing up children for 21 years now, and so meditating is something that I've learned to do on my feet. And I regard every minute of my day as a meditation now. Regard whatever I'm focused on, whatever I'm bringing my attention into is a meditation. So you can sit quietly in a place of Zen with no one bothering you for an hour, kind of feeling the beautiful energies pour in, but that's not been my experience. My meditation is on my feet, being completely immersed into what I'm doing. My meditation is running, my meditation is kickboxing, my meditation is going out into the woods twice a week, bringing the information through that I need to put out on YouTube and Facebook. So it all depends on what your circumstances are, where you are, how you do it. I think if I got shut in a room on my own with a cushion and told to meditate for an hour, I'd be climbing the walls. That's just the way I'm wired. And I've learned to accept that. So
did you say that you've got some guided meditations? Are they available to the public?
Very much so. If you go onto my website, www.timwilde.com, or my Facebook page, Tim Wilde Practical Ascension, my way of meditating is through guided visualizations. So that works for the way that my mind works. As somebody is speaking and I can picture and visualize, and the energy, I can feel the energy coming in. And I have lots of them that are available that I've written over the years that are formulated to support each aspect of what we're going through energetically and physically on the ascension pathway.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thanks for that. Tim, let's get into fatherhood. How many children do you have? How many sons?
4 altogether. My stepson is 22. My eldest is 21. My teenager is 17, and my youngest is 11. So
Great.
Navigating the spiritual pathway, and lots of you parents out there will know this, that anybody can be fifth dimensional if they're sat on the top of a mountain eating berries in a state of peace and quiet. But if you've got kids, everything changes. And so that is where I'd say probably the bulk of my refining, my fine tuning has laid over the last, particularly over the last 10 years or so. So yeah, I mean, they are our most important teachers. They are also the foundation for the future of the fifth dimensional reality on this planet. So the kids are where it's at.
Let's get into this experience of 4 boys in the house, plus you and your partner, wife. How does that Zen play out in day-to-day life, in a busy, hectic life where people aren't always going to agree? How do you be the best version of a father that you can be? What are your priorities, values?
By persistence, that persistence, and I think probably a good degree of bloody mindedness has actually refined my process over the years, because sometimes it has been virtually, I mean, I'm having to ping pong from one space to another on a daily basis. I'll move from doing what I'm doing now, or presenting a Zoom, or being out, or coming back from presenting a workshop, straight back into the family environment. Bang, you got to change. You've got to get straight back into that. So energetically, it's that kind of like chameleonship of being able to adapt to the various different circumstances that are presented, but ultimately holding your center line. Okay, holding that center line within the work, and you find your balance, you find your medium. So you find that you can reach into each different aspect of what you've got to do, be it parenthood or be it ascension work, and they're all tied in with each other. So ultimately, you've got to be the same person, but you play different roles. As long as you've got that energy stable, as long as you've got that that point of perception. But I'll be quite honest in saying is that the one thing that I've really struggled with is to not let my focus upon my work bleed into the time that I need to have with my family, because it does affect it. That when you take on this role of responsibility, when you feel that your very purpose on this planet is to create support and initiate change, then that affects the person that you are. And that can have a very powerful effect on the people around you. And it's not always a good one. So you've got to find that balance, that anchor point, where the energy that you put into what you do is as refined and as acceptable for the people around you that might not necessarily be on the same trajectory as you. Yeah. So it's about balance. It's about yeah, I think that's been now talked about. That's what it's all been about: balance, unity, kind of integrating all of the different aspects of this experience and coming through it is as groundedly as possible, if that's a word. I don't know whether it is or not. Groundedly.
We created it, right? Any other tips there for fathers that are struggling to find this balance?
Listen to your kids. Basically, let your children be who they need to be, because also another thing that we get very strong opinions about things when we know stuff on the spiritual pathway. You know, we know what's right for the planet. We know what's right for other people. We know what healing they need or what they need to be doing. You need to let people be who they are, because it again, and then that if you don't, then you are effectively, I mean, up until age 16, we are energetically responsible for our children. Okay, once they've hit 16, a different aspect of their soul downloads and they're off. You know, that's why 16 is such an important age, because they're turning into adults and that adult aspect of the soul is coming in. From 19 onwards, energetically, we can only advise. So it's a big, important transition point at that point. So being a parent is very important. If you are spiritual and you've got your children here, treat them as you would treat yourself, but with extra love and extra care, and just provide them that space to be who they've incarnated to be, not who you think they should be because you've woken up and you're spiritually orientated. So again, it's about balance.
Yes. And often, you know, we think we're doing it out of love, but if we can really have a look at our motives, it's often out of control. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah. The things that we don't like about. Yeah, we do. But again, we couldn't be at a more confusing point on the transition. You know, we're unlearning everything that we were previously and applying it to this new vibration. And I always have this kind of dreamy visage in my head of in the future we will be functioning like golden, as we did in Golden Atlantis, where the kids are no longer tied into the current school system. They're learning as children would like to learn, by play, by being in the forest, by working with each other, not being sat down and drilled with stuff to remember or kind of punished for not doing so. You know, everything has got to change. Everything will change. You know, once the majority of people step into this field and the realization occurs, and there's been this huge wave of people that are pulling from the school system, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years or so, because the biggest part of the wake up has happened in the last 3 years, from 2020 to the end of this year. From 2019, you start to see the energy really kind of building up. Everyone was very frustrated. Everyone was like, something's got to shift. And then beginning of 2020, there's this huge change of circumstances. And that was when the wake-ups really began. I think Archangel Metatron told me, and I've just got to say, it's a funny conversation I had with Archangel Metatron. I was sat there on New Year's Eve, 2019 into 2020. And it was just one of these rare moments of peace that I'd managed to claw for myself. I was sat in my bedroom, and I don't usually do this. I don't get the time or the opportunity to do this, just to see the new year in and actually communicate and say what I want from it. And Archangel Michael and Metatron dropped in and said, "Oh, this is going to be a very interesting year. 2 billion people are going to wake up by the end of it." And I was like, "What?" And that's when the red flag went up. immediately. It's like, well, what circumstances could occur on this planet that would trigger the awakening, not the full awakening, but the actual energetic process of the beginning of the awakening in the space of 12 months. And he said, by the winter solstice of 2020, you'll have seen the biggest mass wake up on this planet that's ever been recorded in history. So, and lo and behold, by February, we knew exactly what was occurring. We were plunged into the whole of the kind of the palaver of the lockdowns and all of this stuff, and the world began to change. So it was the wake ups at the moment. We touched upon this earlier, didn't we? The wake ups now, the people that are waking up, if you're listening to this and you've woken up recently, your experience will be very condensed. It will be very intense. Everything that you're learning will be happening in real time, in very, very rapid and quick succession. But the beautiful part about it is the guidance and the support is now available. And ultimately, I see that we are flowing on this timeline towards a period where the children will be outside learning and playing with each other. The control structures will have broken down. They will have collapsed. They will be no more. They will be something that we learn from, and we will not be returning to that energy again. And it's a gradual process. There's many schools of thought out there at the moment and I believe a lot of them are fear seeded, where we get bashed back to the Stone Age. We've got no food, we've got no money, we've got no electricity. All of these things that play on our survival fears. And I don't believe that's the way it's going to occur. I've always been shown a transition, a smooth from 3D to 5D, where we take what we need and we go. Basically, energetically, we leave that space. That's what we're doing at the moment. And the kids are going with us. Kids are, yeah, let us out of it, sort of thing. They're loving it.
So I'm interested now, is everyone transitioning to 5D, or will some get left behind?
My original numbers, and this was given to me by Archangel Michael in 2008, were that 6 billion people were walking through the Ascension Gateway. So you've got 8 billion people on the planet. 6 billion people have signed up on a soul contract level for the Ascension process. So that's a good number. At the time, I didn't think those numbers were good enough. I was saying, well, what about the other billion people? You know, what happens to the billion people that don't? And they are, you know, there's a lot of soul migrations going on at the moment. You know, people are moving over at a rapid rate, whether it's something that's been, you know, there's always a physical trigger for a soul to leave physical, move into the higher realms. Some people just did not want to go through what we're going through. Other people have decided that they have not spent enough time in 3D and want to continue learning at that level, at that experience. But 6 billion of us are moving through, and the target date is 2032. So if you think about the natural process of birth, life, and death on this planet, by the time we get to 2032, that you've got that number of a billion that are choosing to not learn or continue at the frequency that we are. And but that gateway is not set. It's a door that's been left open. So they might decide to come along 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line. It all depends on where their level of learning and experience actually is. So it's quite fluid.
Fascinating, because you called our episode From Ego to Heart, Transition to the Golden Age. So what is the Golden Age?
The Golden Age is going to go back to my favorite days now, days of Atlantis. You know, like Atlantis existed for 260,000 years as a continent in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It rose and fell 5 times. And during the 5th and the final experiment, the Atlanteans they nailed it. They spent 1,500 years living together in this kind of like, you know, this domed community in the middle of the ocean at a fifth dimensional frequency. They're at harmony with each other. They're at harmony with the land that they lived on. They're at harmony with the animals. Their technology was off the charts, you know, like Star Trek style levels of healing and all the rest of it. What the only thing that can confine them was they couldn't spread this to the rest of the world. So it was the Atlantean experiment, it was the Atlantean experience. Now, during that 1,500 years, you wonder, well, why did they do this? What was the whole point of doing that? Apart from to see if it was physically possible to retain, like to overcome the ego, to live within the heart and be on a physical planet that was essentially third dimensional. But the whole reason why they did it, and I've seen this a little bit later on down the line quite clearly, they did it to record what I call a gold print for the future of humanity. So what they achieved during that 1,500 years is essentially a kind of like a set of guidelines for us to move into. So we know what we're doing. The majority of us have incarnated here to knowing what we've got to do to move into this golden future. And it is a bit of a cliche. The golden future is because we are now we're moving into the age of Aquarius. It's a different energetic setup, and it is going to be classed as a golden era. So this period of time that we're moving into, we're creating, we're setting up, we're building at the moment, and ultimately is a golden era because we are no longer going to be living on a planet that is dominated by the ego. It is going to be living by the flow of the heart.
Yes. Wow, I love that. Thank you. Tim, we're going to wrap up now. Is there any other message you have for men? Anything we haven't touched on that you would like to use this time to speak about?
I think I'll just kind of recap on what I said earlier for all you beautiful men out there. It's just like this isn't a period of time to be worried about being who you are. It's simply to embrace your masculinity, your humanness, to enjoy being. I think the most important thing, and this applies not just for men but for women as well, is the acceptance of our humanity here on this planet. So that goes out to everybody. You chose to be here, okay? You signed the contract, fella. You know, you incarnated into this body in the most incredible period of time. I mean, 500 years ago, yeah, you'd have just had an incarnation, but this particular one, for you listening to this is most likely your master incarnation. This is the incarnation that all of the other ones have led to, and it's the stepping up. It's the transitional incarnation. So you might be feeling a little bit lost, a little bit kind of belittled by all of the things that you are receiving, completely overwhelmed, but that will not stay that way. You will find your feet, you will stand up, and you will honor that physicality that you have. And it doesn't matter how you express it, as long as you express it from the heart. So just enjoy the ride. You're here as part of a massive team. You're not just one person. There are billions of us around the world now. A lot of us maybe not have realized that we're doing what we're doing, but that doesn't matter. We're all going to form part of this team. We already are an enormous team alike. So enjoy, because it's going to be a fun ride.
Oh, that's such a powerful message. Thank you, Tim.
Oh, thank you, Gemma.
So I'm going to put your website in and your YouTube channel. Are there any other links that you'd like me to share below where people can find you or your work?
I think it's just www.timwilde.com. I've tried to keep my social media as compact as possible. Yeah. I used to be on Instagram, but I had to shut it down just simply because it was too much for me to deal with at the time. But so it's Tim Wilde Practical Ascension, Tim Wilde Practical Ascension on YouTube. That's growing nicely. And timwilde.com, which is my website, which has got all of the accumulated goodies on.
Oh, great. Well, I'll definitely drop those below. And people can find Tim and his beautiful meditations, because I've also been well, trying to, well, give men the opportunity to experience different types of meditation, to find one that they resonate with. So here we do have another type of meditation that, you know, will definitely work for some men and some not. So it's just a matter of feeling your way around. Well, Tim, what a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much.
It's been a real honor, Gemma. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me on and asking me about my process, because some, you know, I have to really cast my mind back and think about the particularly the last 20 years. They've been pretty full on, and it's good to look back on it. It's like find out what happened, why it happened, and ultimately that can be guiding points for other people going through the same thing. So
exactly. Amazing. So for everyone watching, could you please like, share, get this message out, subscribe to my channel so you can get the updates, and I'll be back in another couple of days with another episode of Heart Warriors. So bye.
lots of love. See you soon.